Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, thank you. Let me say thank you to Al Cardenas and ACU and all of the organizers and sponsors of CPAC. I came to my first CPAC conference 27 years ago as a brand new state legislator in Ohio, and I'm certainly pleased to be here today as the Speaker of the whole House of Representatives. Let's stop for a second. And let's picture America on a date in the not-so-distant future. Let's say September 23rd, 2014. 4 years to the day since we unveiled our Pledge to America, a document that commits us to govern based on the truths of our founding. It would be a year and a half after the enactment of the Economic Freedom Act of 2013 under a new president and a new Senate. The economy is growing after the tax code has been reformed from top to bottom. Thousands of special interest loopholes are gone. Rates have been permanently lowered for every American. The deficit's dropping and our entitlement programs are being saved because Washington now operates on Paul Ryan's budget. Again, picture this date, September 2014. Gas prices are falling as the Keystone Pipeline is being built, and preparations are made to drill on a tiny patch of ANWR's 19 million acres. Obamacare has been repealed and replaced with market-based reforms that protect the greatest health care system in the world. The Hyde Amendment, banning all taxpayer funding of abortion, has been codified into law. And there are no czars or boards of bureaucrats telling employers where they can and cannot create jobs. Talk about a shining city on a hill? Sounds like utopia to me. But some might look at it all and say, it can't be done. Well, that's exactly what they told Ronald Reagan when he ran against Jimmy Carter, promising lower taxes and a stronger national defense. It's exactly what they said in 1994 and in 2010 when Republicans sought to take the majority control of the House. And that's exactly what they said as a candidate for House Majority Leader in 2006 when I made it clear I wanted to end the earmark practice in Washington, D.C. Well, I'm here today to tell all of you that it can be done. In high school, I played football for a guy named Jerry Faust. He taught us, our team, that there's nothing in life that you can't accomplish if you're willing to show up, work hard, and make the sacrifices necessary in order to succeed. You know, I followed this code when I ran a small business, but I had no idea it would ring even more true in politics. A long time ago, a philosopher called politics the slow boring of hard boards. Let me tell you what, the boards can be pretty hard when you've got a government like ours that's so big and bossy, as my good friend Mitch Daniels likes to say. We've got a responsibility to recognize that even with control of all branches of government, real reform doesn't happen all at once. It's one step at a time. And our responsibility is to keep faith. To give our countrymen a cause to believe in. And even as we recognize the realities of today, we have to be as ambitious as hell about what we need to do in our future. Now listen, no one loves Congress, but I can tell you for a fact that the House, at least, is a different place than it was just a few years ago. A far different place than it was 20 years ago when I was a freshman member of the House. Back then, you had members bouncing checks at the House bank, trading stamps for cash at the House post office, and I and a handful of my freshman colleagues decided to speak out. So the story of the Gang of Seven is pretty well documented. But what isn't as well known is how our leaders responded to all of our rabble-rousing. Our minority leader back then was Bob Michael. Bob held all of the cards. He could have cut my legs off. He could have done a number of things to make sure that I had no future. But he never tried to stop us. He knew that things had to change, and he knew that we were listening to the people. And I've never forgotten that. When I was minority leader, I gave a speech on that Sunday night in March of 2010 when the Democrats rammed Obamacare through the House. I looked across the aisle that night and I asked the Democrat leadership a simple question. Can you honestly say that you've read this bill? That it was put together with honesty and integrity instead of behind closed doors hidden from the people? And you all remember what I said. Hell no, you can't. The Democrat members in the House that night booed me for that. But across the country, the American people were booing them because they weren't listening to the American people. They said conservatives would never control the House again. But they were wrong. Actually, they were dead wrong. It's often said that the Obamacare vote, that together with the disgrace of the Obama stimulus, gave birth to the new majority in the House. Not exactly what I call an immaculate conception. But I do think it's safe to say the united front that we put up against Obamacare and against the stimulus and their national energy tax were all huge factors in our success. But what truly defines this majority is how it's different in the past from majorities both Democrat and Republican. That was a promise that I made to all of you 2 years ago here at CPAC, that our majority would do things differently, particularly when it comes to listening to the American people. To put together our governing agenda, we look to the people, not to politicians. We receive thousands of ideas and use them to craft our pledge to America. And when I took the gavel from Nancy Pelosi and said we'd have open debates in the House, folks on the other side of the aisle didn't boo that time, they just laughed. They laughed and called it a stunt when we read the Constitution on the floor of the House from start to finish. And they laughed again last fall when I said we'd write a federal transportation bill with 0 earmarks in it, linked directly to the expansion of American energy production. Well, let me tell you what's been going on in the House, in the People's House here in the last couple of weeks. Last week we voted to repeal the Class Act as part of the Obamacare bill that makes it harder for small businesses to create jobs. And we did it again in an open process, in an open debate. Now think about that for a second. They rammed Obamacare through the House using every trick in the book to stifle dissent and to circumvent the will of the American people. We're allowing a wide open process to repeal it. And by the way, this is exactly how the House will deal with the Obama's recent attack on religious freedom in our country. Because what's ultimately at stake here is a First Amendment right and a fundamental American value that has stood for 2 centuries. We're going to handle this openly and deliberately so that every lawmaker can have their say and the voice of the people can be heard. One thing's for certain, this attack on religious freedom cannot and will not stand. The House next week will vote on a transportation bill that has no earmarks. Now you may remember in 2005 a Republican Congress passed a highway bill with 6,371 earmarks, some small, some not so small. Only 8 members of the House voted against it, and I'm proud to say I was one of them. The bill on the floor will have no earmarks. We've not had any bill this entire past year that's had 1 earmark in it at the request of a member. Will the bill pass? For the good of the country, I sure hope so. But that's not up to me, and that's up to the House working its will. It's a lot harder to win votes when you don't have goodies to pass out, and a lot harder than it used to be. And part of it's because the majority listened to the American people and we banned earmarks. We sacrificed a powerful tool that's been around for decades. It's what we said we'd do, and frankly, it's the right thing to do. There's not a majority full of members willing to trade their votes away for the promises of a pork barrel project. They're listening to the people just like Bob Michael knew that the Gang of 7 was listening to the people during the House bank scandal. And I make no apologies for that. Yes, things are harder, but I really wouldn't have it any other way. Of course, that means every few months, geez, I don't know, maybe it's every couple of weeks, I get up in the morning, I turn on my iPad, and I read some story that starts with these words. John Boehner is facing the toughest test of his speakership. They always like to use the word tumultuous to describe our majority. Well, let me just tell you, it doesn't bother me at all. I actually take it as a compliment. Because that's the whole idea, to let the place breathe, to let the people's house work its will. I'd much rather lead a tumultuous majority that listens to the people than one that's controlled, that substitutes its will for the will of the American people. This is the house that our forefathers designed, and this is what they had in mind. And it's only their intent that really matters. I say all this to make a point. All things are possible for those who believe. The utopia I described at the beginning might sound like a pie in the sky. It certainly would have sounded that way had I presented it to you when we gathered here 3 years ago at the beginning of this presidency. I remember those days very clearly. All the talk about Republicans on the ropes, conservatism in retreat. But we came here and we vowed to stand together, and we all vowed to stand on principle. We've come a long way since. Not as far as I'd like, but too far to turn back now when there's so much at stake. You know, the path we began forging 3 years ago now represents the nation's best hope for reclaiming its founding truths. And 3 years from now, we'll know whether we succeeded. Do we want the attendees of CPAC in 2015 to say, you know, they spoke of great things, but they always allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And if only so-and-so were our nominee, if we had more seats in Congress, if only this bill went a little bit further. Or do we want them to say, thank God they locked arms so we can do better by our children and keep this nation strong and free. Listen, I know this is a lot, and it's a lot tougher than it sounds. But it starts with humbling ourselves and recognizing that it starts with us. It starts with a willing to recognize we're part of a cause that's much greater than ourselves. It starts with a willingness to serve others and serve with others who may not have the exact same outlook on every single tactic. It starts with a willingness to put the country's interests before our own comforts, to sacrifice the moment when it calls for it. Maybe we can't see our future, but we know our history. America is much more than a country. It's an idea built by patriots and sustained by hard sacrifice. You know, each of us, we've got to give of ourselves, and we each have to do our part so that we can keep our rendezvous with destiny. It can be done, and it will be done, if we can count on each other and our countrymen can count on us. I'm grateful to stand united with all of you in pursuit of a better America. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for participating. God bless all of you, and God bless our great country. Thank you.